Hi, I'm Owen from Rask Australia. Thanks for tuning in to the Rask Network.
Before we get into today's show, there are a few things we have to go over.
Firstly, what you're about to hear and see is limited to general information only. It's not personal financial advice like you'd get from a financial planner. Also, it's important to remember that past performance is not indicative of future performance. That means that anything that's happened in the past, or we say today, is not necessarily going to reflect what happens in the future. Lastly, please consider that any of the guests or myself are featuring on this program may have a financial interest in some of the products or shares mentioned. That's enough from me. I hope you enjoyed today's program.
Evan, welcome back to Brain Hacks.
Thank you, Kate. It's great to be back. Today we're going to talk about something that actually is quite painful. The reason I use that word is nobody likes to admit you've made a mistake.
Yes, and I think everyone has probably experienced this, even if it's not about their investing journey. Maybe it's something they did with their finances. They spent money on something that they just really regretted spending money on, a career decision, a study decision, all sorts of decisions that we might look back and go, oh, I kind of wish I didn't make that. But we're going to talk about what to do if you do make a decision that then you later realize, hey, that wasn't probably the right decision for me, how to overcome some of those feelings and move on instead of throwing more energy and money and time after something that's not working out.
Yeah, because the whole concept of Brain Hacks is to talk about behavioural economics. And don't forget that human beings need to embrace the fact that we have inherent imperfections and that the complexity of choice means that you're going to make a mistake, right? Because that's what a choice is. You are making, it's not binary because it normally has multiple decision makings, but it's not one or the other.
Yeah, you're choosing not to pursue 5 other valid options and you're choosing to pursue one.
But human nature also has the innate bias that we have to be right. Particularly in a Western culture, there is this whole idea that, you have to keep striving, you have to be right. Everything is, forward. But
especially
also
with money.
Yeah,
we don't
but it's
want
embarrassing,
to be wrong.
right? It's also embarrassing. We don't want to be wrong, as you said, with money. That's a perfect way of looking at it. You don't want to be wrong. You then also have that, we've discussed this in previous episodes, you then bring in loss aversion, right? And actually telling yourself you've made a loss. You've made a mistake. You've made a loss. The investment you've got is not doing what it's supposed to do, but I don't want to admit that. It's not just that, and we'll talk about this through the episode today, but when we talk about sunk cost fallacy, which is what we're talking about, where you continuously sink cost, and cost isn't just capital. Let's also point that out there. That is emotion, it is time, it is effort, it's belief, and it's money, right? So those, and they're not always interlinked. I mean, if you think about with that idea, you can have time and an emotional sunk costs. It doesn't cost you any capital, but you know this in your book and talking about buying happiness is that you've taken so much time and so much effort to do something and you've started to realize that actually it's not working. That is sinking cost into something.
Yeah, and there's a huge cost as well with inaction. Like I think one of the biggest mistakes that many of us make at the start of our investing journey is not actually going on that investing journey and just getting stuck at the start line and never taking that first step. So, I mean, that's something we try to help people overcome on the podcast and through our free courses, but so many interesting things to dive into.
Mm-hmm. So let's be open, right? Let's try and be open, and we've always put our hands up and said that we make mistakes all the time, but let's really try and be open with the listeners and go, okay, here's my biggest mistake. I'll let you go first because I've got a doozy.
I know you've got a good one to share. I don't think I've had as much time to make a huge mistake. So I think I've made lots of small mistakes along the way.
But does that add up for you? If you look at them, does it add up as,
probably in
a consistent mistake?
Cost.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So explain that.
I'd say, especially at the start of my journey, I was not investing. I was just buying and selling things, which is definitely not classified as investing in my books. So that's something I learned a lot from though. So that's why I'm kind of like, it's a bit awkward to call it a mistake because if I didn't do that, would I have still taken that first step or would I have waited 5 or 10 more years to become an investor?
So that's a learning mistake. So you're right. So that's a positive mistake because you've learned from the fact that getting in and out doesn't actually help you in any shape or form. It's more the mistake was that's not how you invest.
But I've definitely purchased companies that I've heard friends talk about, especially at the very start of my investing journey when I was getting news and information from 360 degrees around me. I was just taking everything in and going, oh, that company sounds really cool. They're doing this cool thing. I didn't actually take the time to even go on the company's website and go, what are they actually doing? Which is something we suggest for listeners now, to actually just be able to explain what an investment is to their friend. So that was something else I learned a lot from, and I did lose money. I haven't really quantified it.
Yeah, so I think you've said a lot of things in there that comes to me. So I'm going to come to my example in a minute. And the reason I want to say that is that you talked about opportunity costs. You talked about capital loss, but you did have a positive learning experience because, the old saying is, you only learn from making mistakes, which is true. What I want to talk about is very clearly a sunk cost fallacy example. So for those of you that don't know what sunk cost is, as I said at the start, it's about basically applying some form of cost into something that will never actually get back to breaking even. Or it's not even about that. The amount of cost you've put into it will far exceeds any form of gain that comes with it. Now, the most sunk cost fallacy is sometimes actually called Concorde fallacy. So the Concorde experiment, the planes, for those that you remember back in the 2004 or 5, I think it finally finished. But the whole concept of that Concorde program started in 1955. Right, the UK government at the time, after the Second World War, came up with the aeronautical division in the UK around the Concorde project. They pitched it. The French got involved about 5 years later, but it took 20 years before the first Concorde was actually made. And they had sunk over at that time just shy of £1 billion. Right, 1955 to 1975. Think about that. And then when the planes actually got in the air, they were losing money hand over fist. But because both the French and the UK government had spent so much money, the whole project was still going. They just kept sinking money into it. And then we had the horrible events of Air France back in 2000, where obviously about 190 people died when one of them blew up. Still took 4 years for it to stop. So from 1955 to 2004, it's unknown how much cost has been sunk into it, but it's well and truly into the tens of billions of pounds. So not dollars, pounds. That's incredible. So that is why sometimes sunk cost fallacy is called concourse fallacy. Big lead in. Do apologise.
Is that the concept people talk about of throwing good money after bad money?
Yes. That's exactly it. One sentence. I should have just started with you there, Kate. Yeah, you just say that. So my sunk cost is something that not many people talk about because everybody makes the idea that property is this unfallible, absolutely certain investment. Property is brilliant. Don't get me wrong. I have done very well from property. But my biggest sunk cost fallacy mistake was my investment property. Because when we got into it and why we were doing it had merit. But like what you said with your stocks, what we originally were wanting to do with the property and what we ended up getting and where it was and how it was didn't marry up. We got distracted. And then what you forget about property, all property is geared, right? The reason property makes a lot of people a lot of money is because
leverage.
Yeah, it's geared, right? You're borrowing money from a bank to buy an asset. Now, you can do that in shares. Now, we all talk about we don't recommend you do that. Some people do, and that makes complete sense. But in property, 99%
none of us can afford to buy
99% of people can't do it without going to the bank and getting leverage. So that's why it's so attractive to people. Go, look at how much money I've made in property. Well, of course you have. You've leveraged. I mean, that's great. Well done. Congratulations. But we lost track of that. Not only that, you forget also, you then have to deal with income. You've got to deal with tenants. You've got to deal with all the costs that come with it, the increase in taxes, the amount of regulation that now happens, losing a tenant.
Dishwasher breaking down.
Yep. Heating breaking down, issues around termites, all of these kinds of things, right? And not only that, so I pride myself on my investing, and all of a sudden this property was taking not just my capital, but my emotion and my time. I was spending 90% of my, what I refer to as my investing time, on this one thing. And I'm an overly optimistic person. Don't worry, I can see why economically this makes sense. We've got migration, all this kind of stuff, and just kept justifying this investment until I couldn't any longer. I'm like, hang on a minute, this is actually not going to work because all of the money I'm sinking into it for the capital gain that I'm supposedly going to get in the future actually doesn't work. It doesn't work. So this is the question. You've made a mistake. Now what? The first thing that I had to get to was accept it.
Yeah. How long did it take you to come to that position of acceptance?
I didn't. My wife did, right? So that was my advantage, is that my wife basically came in and said, I think we've got a problem here. We need to accept that this is a problem. What else could we be doing with the money we're sinking into this project? And I'm like, I could probably keep investing in things that I know I'm better at doing, or I could probably start putting it towards other things. Oh, crap. Okay. I've sunk cost into something that is never going to actually come back. So I've made a mistake. So the first part of it is accepting it.
Yeah.
You said this before, opportunity, right? And that's what also broke it when my wife came to me and said, what can we do with that money? The opportunity cost is the other major part of accepting. Right, the money that I'm putting per month into just servicing the loan, what could you do with that?
Yeah.
And that was the turning point. And then we were like, right, done. Accept the loss, move on. That opportunity cost is so much better elsewhere. So that's my horrible mistake. Yeah. Come at me for those of you that have done well, and I'm so glad you have. But you need to understand, acceptance is the first part, and then realizing your opportunity is the second.
Yeah, and a lot of people have a similar experience with shares or investing in a fund when it falls in value and they say to me, I'm just waiting to break even. And they'll wait for years and years and it doesn't always work out.
Yeah.
But you've also got to think, while you're waiting for years and years just to break even, you could have been doing something else with that money.
Yeah. And so crystallizing, that's the technical term, crystallizing a loss.
Yeah. It's a hard thing. We talk a lot about capital gains a lot. Like, you're going to have to pay tax, but it means you've made some money. But capital losses, we don't talk about.
Yeah, and the flip side of what also a lot of the studies show, we're happy to take a small amount of profit, but we also are very happy to let big losses run and run and run. So it's exactly what you just said, which is I cannot accept the red on screen and crystallizing that loss. Even though net altogether, your profit and your loss probably has you up. The opportunity cost that you're missing there is why making a mistake is human. Making a mistake, as Kate's already pointed out at the start of this, is a learning experience. You won't make the same mistake because you particularly when it's a negative mistake, because all mistakes somewhat are negative, you will reinforce your behavior not to go forward with it. So you will do better due diligence with what you talk about with your shares. Or for me, I won't invest in a property that has the wrong reasons to go into it. Doesn't mean I won't ever do it again. My wife probably will tell me not to, but
she's probably the more sensible one here.
We'll talk about that another time. But at the same time, the learning experience is that, okay, the opportunity for the future is the other thing. And you and I talk about this. Time is the next question here, right? So the time cost and then the time future. All right. So the time to actually grow better investments versus the time required to get back to zero. That also should be the next step, right? Mm-hmm. So the money that you start taking out of that sunk cost and then putting it to more time positive ventures. If you can start actually doing the maths behind that workout, that can also help you, get away from the mistake. Actually crystallizing a loss is not the end of the world because my future expectations, my future wants and my future goals and the opportunity that they're going to present to me will offset now and the loss and the past loss that you've got that you will never get back. And that's the other hard thing to accept. That mistake has happened. Trying to rectify that mistake by sitting on your hands and waiting for time or throwing more money into it or more time or more effort or more belief or more emotion, it'll drain you.
Yeah. And sometimes it's hard to know if something's a mistake. So an investment you made, you might have had a really good reason for making it, might have fallen in value for all sorts of different reasons. And sometimes it's hard to know, did you make a mistake? Is it a bad company or is it still a good company? It's just having a tough time or the economy's struggling.
Yeah. So I've got another question for you and I'm putting you on the spot here. My other thing for you is that when you just talked about, is it the company or is it you? Is it the investment or is it you? How do you deal with the mistake of actually somebody else imposing on you? So what I mean by that, it doesn't have to just be investing. You've had some pretty interesting life experiences that I'm not going to talk about. I'll let you do that yourself. But when you've actually felt somebody else's mistake personally, how did you deal with that? Because this is the other part of this question. It's not just you've made a mistake. Someone else has made a mistake and it impacts you. What do you do? I know I've put you on the spot here. And the reason I ask you that question is because this is the other thing that comes with this thing is accepting that mistakes are your own. It's even harder accepting mistakes of other people that actually come to you, right? So if somebody has made a financial mistake that then impacts you, how do you deal with that? And what I'm getting towards here, this is sort of going slightly off what we're talking about, but again, the investing's sort of part and parcel with it. And I know I put you on the spot. I'm sorry, Kate.
Yeah, I don't think I've got an answer for you.
Yeah, and so that's what I want to happen. For those of you listening, that is a question that also needs to be had. And the reason I say that right now is because in my view, the next 6 to 9 months, that question is going to appear constantly, particularly in employment, particularly in repayments, because we have a scenario now where interest rates are rising, inflation's on the way up, your investments are starting to really feel the pressure of that, and the decisions that the investments that you have been made, the mistakes that they make will come through to you, whether that's through your investment or whether you possibly get made redundant or lose your job, or whether or not the business that you've started that has done incredibly well, all of a sudden, your clients or your sponsorship or whatever it is that you get revenue coming into you, their mistake actually impacts you directly. This is the next part of that question and that discussion, because that's not your mistake. That's theirs that you now have to wear.
Yeah, it's an interesting one to think about. I think I'll have to take that one away.
Yeah, and so I want to do that because I want that to sort of go into the next part of Brain Hacks, because I think this is the discussion that is going to get more and more prominent at the end of 2023, 24, and possibly even into 2025. Other people's mistakes affecting you, because that is going to become more and more. And so I'm going to give them the homework. The homework is acceptance of it, the understanding it's not you, right? So the old thing with relationships, not you, it's me.
Sometimes it's both.
Sometimes it's definitely both. And that's the fourth one. So you caught me on that one, which is that sometimes it's both of you, in the fact that their mistake was glaringly obvious and your mistake was to believe their mistake. They are the things that comes past and the next level. And right now, that thing, I think the reason I want to do that as the vertical commas, the homework, is because preparing for it is part of the answer. Preparing, have it written down, have it running through your head, that if you feel that there's a concern, there's an inkling that a mistake is about to happen, whether it's from you or from somebody else, that you're mentally ready for it. And the liberation that comes with being ready for it will be pretty key if, and let's hope it's an if, it happens.
Yeah. What you're kind of describing is a pre-mortem, where you think ahead of all the things that could go wrong and then what you can do to risk mitigate or manage those things.
Yeah. And it also therefore means that, again, opportunity cost, right? So you're planning your opportunity. You're planning your time. You're planning your emotion. You're planning your beliefs, not just your capital.
Because that's something I like to think about. In my 20-year financial plan of working towards financial independence, what are all the things that could stop me reaching that goal? Yeah. And I'm not going to be able to do things about every one of them, but I can manage my emotions on the way to that journey, and I can also do things about certain aspects of that plan.
Yeah, exactly. So as we talk about all the time, nothing's linear in life, and life is never linear. This is when, this next period in my view, is when the plans that you've put in place, the autonomy thing that I always talk about, doing what you want, when you want, how you want, this is when it comes to the fore. Yeah. Because tomorrow could actually technically be tomorrow rather than 3 or 4 or 5 years away. Yeah. That next period.
And your plans will be tested.
Yeah.
And you'll see that maybe they're not the best plans for you, or that they're the right plan, but it's just going to be really hard to stick to it.
Mm-hmm. And it's back testing your plan. It'll illustrate your mistakes. It'll illustrate the emotional costs that you've put in, the belief costs you've put in. And that I think is the way to look at this, is to go, okay, yes, we are now facing, and finally I think the population's waking up to the idea that we are facing a different period, a period that we haven't really faced since COVID, or realistically for most people since the 90s, with the change in their finances. And I'm ready for it. And that's, I think, what I'm getting to is that those 4 things we talked about before, other people's mistakes, coming back to you, mistakes of both sides, coming back. Hey, all of that is the homework for what I want to wrap up with regards to today. You've made a mistake, talking about sunk cost. Identify that. Go and identify your sunk cost. Start to think about how do you rectify and how you make your opportunity so much better by actually looking into the future. And your opportunity cost is actually getting out of your sunk costs and looking into that future period.
Yeah, good idea for anyone to try and apply this to a mistake they've made in the past.
Yeah.
Or maybe they're making it right now.
Correct. Kate, great episode. Thank you as always for having me.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Catch previous episodes of Brain Hacks. I'll link them all in the show notes, and we've got plenty of resources on Rask Education if you're looking to level up your financial education skills.